Boardroom Bound, Episode 19, The Cheat Sheet for Board Service with Debbie Seeger.
We look at the average age of board directors, and we know that there's going to be more board turnover in the next 10 years in this country than ever in our country's history. And that means a lot of opportunity for more people.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes and the links to the files that we'll be talking about at podcast.gordon.edu. In today's show, we'll be speaking with Debbie Seeger. She's a co-founder of Patina Solutions and has over 20 years of board experience herself. She serves as Patina's Senior Vice President and is currently a board chairman with GPS Education Partners. Debbie is also a strong proponent of coaching and mentoring to help build the next generation of leaders. Before we jump into the show, I'd like to give a quick thank you this week to someone who gave us a review and a rating on Amazon. And that's because the amazing news is we are now part of Amazon Alexa Flash Briefing. You can find Boardroom Bound and add it to your queue. So Cynthia gave us a great review. She said we are grooming leaders in financial ethics for careers throughout the business sector. The detailed comment was, "This is a great podcast for business professionals. The host gives great tips and reasons why they work. The guests share such personal and interesting stories about making it in the business world. If you are pursuing an MBA or are currently enrolled in a business graduate program, you will benefit from this. The host takes great pride in grooming more leaders in financial ethics, a refreshing twist for colleagues on Wall Street or working in the finance sector. Looking forward to more to come." Well, Cynthia, thank you for those kind words, and we appreciate your 5-star rating and review because that's how people find the show. And if you would love to leave a rating and review yourself on iTunes, especially, or any other place where you're listening to the show, I'd really appreciate that. And I would encourage you to leave a blog or a link to somewhere that I can call out in the show notes and give you credit. In today's show, we're going to be exploring several topics with Debbie, both her individual personal experience of her 20 years of her board career, but also what she does as her day job. And she really helps 3 different types of people. People that are seeking their first board seat. She's also helping for more effective board performance and board placement. She's going to talk us through the different opportunities and goals of those groups, how she works with them, coaches and guides them and helps them. But especially these 2 opportunities come together from what she does personally and what she does in her coaching, because one of the groups that she was a board of when she was on Milwaukee Women Inc, they developed a guide. It's called Preparing for Board Service. And it's really a great cheat sheet that not only explains the steps that you're going to want to go through to get a board role, but also understanding different types of board roles, from, say, an advisory board, perhaps from a startup, to a public board of a company, to a nonprofits board, the pros and cons of being on the different ones, the differences between them. A lot of us can take for granted at the beginning of this process that they're all the same. They're not equal. There are different risks, different upside, different purposes, and it's important to talk through all those. We've got a lot to cover. Let's jump into the show. Debbie Seeger, welcome to the Boardroom Bound podcast.
Thanks, Alexander. Happy to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you here today and talk through not only your individual experience, and you have 20 years of board experience yourself, but also part of it is what you do in your day job about help people getting on boards, but also some of the stuff that you've done sort of in between those, I'll call those, where you're helping other people, coaching them and guiding them. I've got your guidebook in front of us, and we're going to be giving that out to our audience today. So much
Great.
For us to talk about. This is fantastic.
Wonderful. Yeah, we have a lot of topics to cover, but it's never been, I guess, a more exciting time to talk about board service.
There's a lot going on, a big push for diversity in so many different ways, which is really adding new energy and thoughts and concepts into it. And maybe just to set the scene, can you give us a little bit of a context about what you're doing in your career today? Because I think that'll be important for our audience to understand.
So yeah, Patina, we are a 10-year-old company, and we started with the idea of how to bring that 25-year executive to clients who want to tap into it for projects, interim leadership, coaching, mentoring, consulting. And it was about 2 years into the growth of Patina that we recognized that there are a lot of people in this group of executives who are uniquely qualified to serve on boards. Some of them really are just starting their board journey. So how could we help them? Some of them are trying to figure out how to have a more effective board performance. So on our client side, we do work around that. And then we also do direct placements. What we did early on was make a commitment that for every board search we conduct, we're going to have at least one female on the candidate slate. That's just been a personal commitment of ours. What we found out so far is it's possible when you're purposeful, intentional, and proactive about it. As you can imagine, especially in industries like manufacturing, it's not always the easiest thing. But I think one of the things we'll probably talk about more today is, that desire for diversity and what it actually does to help boards perform.
Right. And you've given us so much that have sort of teed up the conversation already. So let's take those different areas that you talked about that the group focuses on. So let's take a classic example. You've got someone who, in your case, has probably been in the C-suite, has been a senior person for a long time, and they're seeking their first board seat, typical of someone in our audience. Can you talk us through the guidance you're giving them, how you walk them through that process? There's so many people are trying to crack that code.
Right. So many people say, I want to serve on a board. And what we've really got to do is kind of unpack that desire and look at it in a couple different ways. We want to find out people's goals and interests, understanding, and readiness. And so there are a couple things that we recommend. One of the things that you said you have is the guidebook. We created that with the local organization here in Wisconsin called Milwaukee Women Inc. That was out of a recognition that there are a lot of people who really don't even understand the board journey, meaning how to get started. And readiness to us is doing research around just understanding what boards do, how do they function, what are all the different kinds of boards, from a board of trustees to a nonprofit board to an advisory board, a public company. They all behave differently. They all perform differently. They all serve a different stakeholder, if you will. And so to understand somebody's desire to be on a board is to start with, their understanding of how different boards operate and perform, and to help them get themselves ready to see themselves on the journey and help plot where they are. And that will help them kind of take that journey toward understanding and readiness.
And I love your guidebook, and we will make this available in the show notes. I know we'll talk about more as we go along, but it's called A Preparing for Board Service in a Guidebook. And it's really, I think, a good roadmap. Just in some ways, some of the basics, and it gets more advanced as the book goes on. But on my personal self, so I'm on an advisory board for multiple startups. That is wildly different from, say, being my board member for the local YMCA. Different responsibilities, different roles, different upsides. And I think a lot of people just think these are all boards. But to your point, they're wildly different.
They're wildly different. And when we looked at the guidebook, we addressed a unique area, I guess, mostly women who really needed to kind of demystify this idea of how to get started. Because what we found is most men have been networking to get each other on boards. And if you're not in the network of men, then you're not necessarily thought of. And so as companies are working to be more proactive and purposeful about doing broader searches. We also want women to realize if you're not out there networking and being vocal about your goals and interests, you may not be thought of. There's a really great book, and it's called The Board Book. And the author's last name is Bowen. And that was the first book that I read before we put this guidebook together. The guidebook, as you know, is a breeze. It's 5 or 8 pages. But if you really want to get into a deeper understanding of what boards are, how they operate, how they're organized, what a director's role is and responsibility, I recommend that as a great start.
Well, that's great. We'll put that in the show notes. It's a wonderful recommendation. And in terms of, let's go back to a candidate, because you were talking about generalizing, perhaps females may not be as ready, but even for males, if they haven't been perhaps thoughtful about the network and perhaps telling their network they're ready, these might be different kinds of people who are coming to you saying, you know what, I know I'm ready now, but I haven't shared that with the world. How do I go about doing it? Is that a typical situation?
Typical situation. And by the way, there's this phenomenon out there, where there's this terminology about board readiness. And with the group Milwaukee Women Inc., what we recognize is that it hasn't really been applied to men historically, as board ready. But all of a sudden, there's this new kind of filtering around women, around their board readiness. And so it's something that we kind of approach. It's a nuance, it's sensitive, but really any board candidate should be assessed around their readiness, male and female. And then that means really looking at how is this board performing? What is the responsibility of a director? For each director to understand who is it you're there to serve. And then, what are your unique qualifications to represent and be a steward of fiduciary responsibility to those stakeholders? That's readiness, right? And so readiness has no gender. It's just been something that's more recently been more applied to women as a filter.
And I think the easiest way for all of us to grasp it is just to think about back when you're a hiring manager looking for someone to fill the role. You're not looking for any person. You're looking for the best person in your pool who's the almost a unique fit and saying like this person is the absolute right one. And in the same way for the board, you're not just looking for your friends because that's not a well-run company. You're looking for the person with the right skill set, the background, the interest, the passion, the intelligence, the cultural fit. It doesn't matter what color they are, what gender they are. All of these things are no longer relevant in the sense of we're looking for the best company's performance. They need the best people, right?
Right, the best people. And the best people then can look different, again, depending on if you're looking for an advisory board, board of trustees, a governing board, a public company, private company. When I talk to people who really don't know what they're getting into, I tell them stories about people who are on large public company boards who report getting 1,300-page board reports that they have to synthesize, review, and be prepared for. And they have to ask questions about not only what does the company think the investment of time is, but talking to other board members and asking what is the actual investment of time. And so, you get on this journey and sometimes it's a careful what you wish for. I've, as you said, been on several boards, and in this most recent one where I became the board chairman, 2 months after becoming the board chair, the president went on a health leave, unexpected. And, guess who had to step up?
Big implications.
Yes. And to be prepared for some of those things that you really hadn't anticipated or nobody told you to be prepared, really, really important.
I have a friend who's on 2 public company boards, and he reports that he gets a minimum 1,000 pages every time there's a meeting. And he has been on these boards for many years. He knows them very well and knows the companies inside and out. So, for example, he said, I'm not going to read the new filing every quarter. I'm going to have them tell me what's new, and I'll look at those parts. And he's learned what he needs to skim, what he needs to read in depth. He's also incredibly bright, so he can pick it up very quickly and get the gist of it for the conversations. And he knows the parts he does a deep dive. But that's someone who's been there and gone through it for a long time. When you're getting that 1,000+ pages the first time, it's going to blow your mind.
Right. And the first time people want to do a good job. And so they want to be prepared, and they should. It's a big responsibility. It's not anything you should take lightly. There are some new board directors who tell me about having a 2-day board retreat, just to start as far as their first onboarding. The onboarding process, not a lot of companies do a good job on onboarding new board directors. The bigger the company, more public, the more governance, the better they do. But I think a lot of companies and directors are looking at the best practices, some of those biggers, because they're following, just better best practices.
And I think this is probably fitting into the second point you talked about, the different types of people and the different ways that you help. Clearly, there are people looking for their board seat, but also people who have a seat already and trying to become more effective, especially thinking about their board performance. I think we're getting there naturally, but let's talk a bit about this as well. How does that situation usually come to you, and what do you do to help improve it?
Yeah, so board performance for us usually starts to look like we've got some people who are on the board for the right reasons at the time, but maybe the company's grown beyond what their gifts bring. Everybody brings gifts, but you need maybe a different set at a different time. Some boards have terms. Board terms are unlimited, and so they aren't getting the turnover that maybe they could benefit from. And that means bringing people in with fresh, new insights who are a little more current. And so we look at board tenure, also communication and culture. One of the biggest things that we see clients asking about in the vetting process of a new director is how well they'll fit in. And, we know that not everybody has to look and act the same, but we really want someone who's going to be able to come in and ask the hard question in a soft way. The last thing you want to do is have somebody come in and hammer the questioning to make everybody feel demeaned or diminished for not thinking of it in the first place themselves. But really that person who can come in and ask good, thoughtful questions, the person who is really best at being independent and thinking about the best interest of the shareholder first before anything else. We all tend to think about how we feel about things. A person who's got a good scenario planning ability versus just kind of take and accept things that are presented to them at face value. Recently, I was sitting with the CEO roundtable about board effectiveness and board diversity, and one CEO said, he was asked, do you see difference in the way women and men on your board perform? And he said, yes. And I'm not ashamed to say this. He said, yes, because the women tend to be more thoughtful first and then action-oriented. The men tend to be more action-oriented first and then thoughtful. And not one is better than the other, but what we have is a really good balance of the two. And so, we know that there's a lot of statistics out there about diversity and company performance. And we know that you can say, well, correlation is not causation.
Right.
But there is, evidence, studies, research. The one I have in front of me is from the Ernst & Young report that said organizations with 30% of female leaders could add up to 6 percentage points to its net margin. And so you ask yourselves, as much as we want to say everybody's equal, is there room in there to say that having diversity of gender is good because people do come from a different framework? Diversity of race is good because you get somebody with a different perspective and background. And so how are these things measured by hard science? I can't say. I can just say anecdotally, CEOs tell us the more diverse, the better.
And it works on so many different levels. People have come from different socioeconomic background, people from different parts of the world. So, for example, my 7 years living in London changed my mindset about how I think about business and cultural interaction. Age is another big thing. I remember I was appointed to a pension board of $750 million, and I was the first person in the 20s. Everybody else was decades beyond that. And the perspective was wildly different as a result, in a good way, right? But I think many things you're talking about are the emotional intelligence of you need to have the confidence in yourself and the ability to ask hard questions, but do it in a way that fits into the group.
Exactly, without shutting down thought, right? Because you want the benefit of thought. And some of the science we talked about on International Women's Day last week was that, where equality exists is when everybody feels safe, that their ideas and thoughts are going to be measured equally. And that's what drives innovation, when people feel safe to voice, to question, to raise concerns. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. I think age is also kind of the new metric in diversity, because like you, I've seen younger people start their board journey, especially in nonprofits. They bring a unique perspective, especially if the end buyer and consumer is younger. There was a company in Milwaukee that brought somebody on their board in their 30s, but because this person was more current on cybersecurity and knowledge about that, and they really needed that as part of their overall board makeup. So diversity means a lot of different things.
And even just the optics of a shareholder looking at the annual report and seeing what does the picture represent when they're looking at the board members. Sometimes that it gives a picture is worth 1,000 words in some ways.
Right. Especially when you see, if women are main consumers of certain things, you want to see that on those companies, they have a good representation of women. And so I think that's changing. What I think, I'm most excited about what I see happening is more and more nominating committees being purposeful and intentional about resisting the urge to just grab the first qualified referral that came along and really work the process of going out and doing a search. The other thing I'm really excited about is just based on the demographics, and you can see if my background, I'm a demographer, and I look at the phenomenon of what's happening as 78 million baby boomers have been moving toward retirement, as 48 million Gen Xers behind them. And, we look at the average age of board directors, and we know that there's going to be more board turnover in the next 10 years in this country than ever in our country's history. And that means a lot of opportunity for more people, more women, more people of different races to serve on boards. We also know that we're continuing to improve what was a pipeline issue. Before when some of the leaders would say, well, I'd love to have a female director, but it's hard to find a sitting CEO female because there weren't that many 25 years ago who came into this business. And so we're seeing that is loosening up again as we get more and more people in the pipeline that are qualified.
Right. Although we've done great work with more diversity in the boardroom than we have done diversity in the C-suite, especially in the CEO seat. So the opportunity continues for all of us to grow and develop as companies when we're encouraging who we think should be representing us overall. So it's about the right person, no matter what they look like, what height they are, et cetera, et cetera. So these are important details. And so we've talked about a new seeker of a board seat. We've talked about someone who is trying to improve board performance. Direct placement is another area where you guys do a lot of specialization. Can you tell us about that too?
Yeah, the direct placement opportunity is big. Again, as companies are thinking more about resisting the urge to just grab somebody from our network and let's go out and work the process of doing an independent search. And at Patina, what we saw is there's a lot of room for a company like ours to serve those companies that are kind of in that mid-market and may not have the wherewithal to pay a big search firm a big fee. And so we can do something that we think is more affordable, but still allow that size company to have a good independent process done. We also feel like with our unique organization of having, 25,000 plus people in the Patina Nation is what we call it. We're kind of fishing in a different pond. And so we've got a unique opportunity to work exclusively with people who have 25 years of experience, have been business leaders, and are going to provide a really good, pragmatic, business expert, experienced approach to being a director. So when they're coming in and they're really looking at, who it is that I'm here to protect, who it is that I'm going to be a steward for, how do I match the risk tolerance of the shareholder, not necessarily the executive team? Mm-hmm. Those are things that are really important for us to include in the board readiness, if you will, beyond just have they been a sitting CEO or CFO, for example. Right. I also think there's another opportunity around diversity to think of people who've come from different executive roles, so that the benefit of having somebody who's been a chief marketing officer or a chief HR officer, especially when we get into this next 10-year period where, talent at an executive level is going to get really tricky, having somebody on board who sees that from the HR workforce planning perspective and really knows how to address the challenges of talent shortages in companies, I think that could be really important.
Well, it's interesting you say that because in one of our previous episodes, we had Jessie Saintcyr on, and she was talking about how she has never had to seek out a board role. Board roles find her because she has that HR talent expertise. And this was episode 6. And it's fascinating for the story. It's like people know me, this is a great example network. People know my reputation, they know my skill set in this area, and then boards come and find me. I haven't needed to go do that. And in some ways, that's the ideal solution. But in many cases, boards are saying, can you go make sure we found the best person? There's probably others out there that are comparable that we would like to consider. And that's probably where they're approaching you, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there are a lot of people who are on their first board, and what I tell them is one of your most important things you can do is be so good they can't ignore you, because the referrals from other people who've worked side by side with you are going to be probably your best opportunity to be considered for other boards. And we tell men and women all the time, if you're approached for a board opportunity and you are at capacity and you can't even consider it, please at least offer to refer somebody from your network, because that just helps us broaden the networks then. But you think of people in your network, you're going to recommend somebody that you had a direct experience working with. And so I know that that's been part of my conscious effort on every board that I've been on, is that if I can't give it my full dedication and be the best darn director they've ever seen, then I'm probably not going to take it on.
And Debbie, let's take that from the flip side. So just carry that conversation forward. If one of your friends who's beginning to think, I want to be on a board someday, and obviously they would want you to know, but probably the rest of the people in their network as well, how do you recommend people share that news and build that set of allies across their network to help them find the opportunities?
I think, again, starting with and assuming that they've done their own kind of self-assessment to interest, readiness, where are they in their journey? And if they're just starting out, then depending on the kind of board they're looking at, they may look at their network and set up either a series of conversations. I think it's not difficult, but some people find it difficult because they have to kind of talk about themselves, but they got to get over that, because what we're trying to work against is the way it used to happen, which was through networking. And if we want to be more intentional and purposeful, and if we want nominating committees to be more intentional and purposeful, then that means as individuals, we have to do the same and to go out there and express our desire and our intentions with people who have either a position to come across opportunities or to influence or refer or recommend. And so I don't think it's, a bad thing at all and people contact me all the time, by the way, to do that.
I'm sure. I'm not surprised.
Some because they see that, hey, Patina does this, right? And then look at where are the companies that are organizing talent for boards like Patina. What other companies are out there, and make sure that you are in their group, in their network, so that, I say this a lot. It's kind of like the lottery. You're not going to win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. But just because you buy a ticket doesn't mean you're going to win the lottery, right? And so you just have to know that there are certain activities that you have to go out and be intentional about doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed you're going to get a board seat. If somebody registers with Patina, they may talk to me, they may express their interest in getting on a board, but our vetting of what fits our clients best is really what determines when we may ever call that person.
Sure.
Make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And I think it's the right way to go because you're trying to honor your clients who are looking for you to do the excellent work for them. And I would love to filter this through your own lens from your experience of 20 years of being on boards yourselves. How did you go about starting it when you first thought, this is something I'd like to consider?
Well, it was a unique situation with the nonprofit. I was in the staffing industry at the time, and this was a nonprofit around getting more people to perform as foster care parents. And so a person that I was connected with said, Debbie Seeger knows everybody in this market, every business owner, every person. And so if there's anybody that we want to have to join our effort to broaden an awareness of becoming a foster parent. So it's just that recognition of being out there in the community, doing things, having a passion about underserved children. It probably learned more in those 9 years than at any other time in my life. And it probably was one of the most rewarding experiences, because if you can imagine, recruiting more people who become foster parents and take a child into their home in the middle of the night, it's a great thing. And then that was where I learned, be so good they can't ignore you, because there was one moment during our board service where I recognized that I was doing the work of two people. The other person was somebody who was on the board in name only and didn't regularly attend, didn't regularly contribute, didn't regularly even contribute of their time to help recruit, or even, with strategy or anything. It was in name only. And I thought that was shameful. I don't ever want to be that person.
Right.
So that's really where I learned that lesson.
And I imagine part of that is if you are, especially if you're going down the nonprofit route, if you're with something that you truly believe in and you're excited about and passionate about, you will show up because you want to show up. I imagine that's a part of it, right? So if someone says, this is a great group, I should be associated with it, you're just not as likely to be able to represent yourself best.
Right. If you examine your own intentions, and if you're doing it just to be a resume builder, then that may not be the best of intentions. We talk about something here called, kind of the only two levers that really for which people work. One is the financial compensation. The other is the emotional compensation. And it's been forever that nonprofits have been able to get people to give of their time for no financial compensation whatsoever. But they give a lot of time because there's a tremendous amount of emotional compensation involved in that.
I think about the YMCA where I serve on, an organization that does so much good. I'm so excited to give them my time and talents. You're right. Right. And so people have to operate in their lives with having those two things in balance. And as people work toward a certain stage of their career, the 25-year plus people, they're more interested in giving of their time in a way that helps other companies perform better. That may be on a paid board or a nonprofit, unpaid. But that emotional compensation surely comes into it, especially on the nonprofit side when they're not getting paid. But there's no shame in wanting to be a director
for a nonprofit board and not getting paid. There's plenty of people that do that every day. The people who want to make a career of it, though, at this stage of their career, to say, if I got on 3 or 4 boards and I got paid, those are the people who are uniquely qualified from a standpoint of having some background around governance, risk management, fiduciary responsibilities that especially public companies have in the post-Enron, world, right? So I think people just have to have, again, the wherewithal to do their own self-assessment on how well qualified are they for the kind of board position they desire.
And so you went from that board role where you basically knocked out of the park from the conversation. And then there's a bit of a part of the story where you ended up working with the Milwaukee Women Group as a board director. And that's where we got this guide that we've talked about before. Help us understand that journey.
The Milwaukee Women Group, again, it was networking, and somebody who was in a leadership position at Manpower 15 years ago with some of the other women leaders in Milwaukee started this organization. The purpose at the time was just to do research on the number of companies that had a percentage of their board as female. And then they added research on the same public companies and the percentage of women in their C-suite. What happened out of that was real recognition once you see the real data. And then what I loved about that organization was I started working with them at a time where they also were evolving to more of a CEO outreach so that they could go out with the idea that we're going to maybe expect that companies want more diversity, and we're just going to help them figure out ways to do it instead of just publishing the research. The research was great. I don't want to say just publishing, but the research was just the beginning of the story. And now it gives us something that every year we can go back and measure against and say, how are we doing? But the real, evangelizing part of this group, Milwaukee Women Inc., was when they said, let's go out and help the leaders who want the help. Because so many CEOs at that time were saying, we want more women on boards. We just don't know where to find them. And you go, well, okay, if that's really the hardest part, then, let's help you. So it's really been fun. And I would say in the last year alone, we are now just starting to look around each other and say, you know what, we're moving the needle. We can see it.
That's a good feeling, especially when you're working with organizations doing good, to see the doing good happening. It's a great thing.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people in our generation too that think about our daughters, maybe our sons too. I talked to my daughter recently about this idea that my generation might be the last bridge between, hers, which could be a true meritocracy. People who are really measured on the value they bring to the company, period. And she would say, Mom, we're not quite there yet, but it's pretty close. Because these are kids who grow up together. They look at each other as being equal. Whereas people of my generation see our parents who still had some kind of, old or dated or stale ideas around how men and women perform. So I feel like my generation is really the bridge between the two. And that's an exciting point to see that we might be breaking through every day to the point that our kids will never even know that this barrier was there in the first place.
There's no better way to finish than just to open it all up, right? And to say that everyone listening on this show, you have opportunities to use your time and talents, not only to help yourself, but to further the cause of good governance, of good hiring, of good practices in the corporate boardroom. And that's what we're all about here, is educating and sharing and growing and networking and developing. And it sounds like you are doing both that personally and walking that walk, as well as talking the talk to your clients and the people that you're serving at Patina. So Debbie, I feel like you've given us so much value today. I'm excited to share your Preparing for Board Service Guidebook with everybody. We'll put that in the show notes. And I know you also recently did a podcast around this about getting more women in the boardroom that we'd like to link to as well.
Yeah, we had two of my favorite leaders and mentors, Mary Ellen Stanek and Kathy Seifert from this region, but they are nationally renowned women who really were, I'm standing on their shoulders. And so I think they also look at the work that we're doing and podcasts like this, and they're just shaking their head going, yes, now we can see that we're moving the needle.
Well, I wonder if you have any parting advice for new and aspiring board members.
I'd say, again, if the guidebook will help you, just sit down in your own private space and say, what really are my goals and interests? Why am I looking to do this? Is it more to serve, some of the maybe nonprofits and have more emotional compensation in the process of doing that to see a company grow and thrive? Is it to build the wherewithal? Some women who've gone on public company boards at first, they would say their executives were a little bit reticent about the time that they were going to commit to this outside board. What they found out was that they learned so much themselves by serving on a board. They were able to bring that learning back into their organization. And that's why we should support this for women as well. So at every level of board service, it delivers in full, in tenfold what the person, beyond what the person brings to it. So that was a long answer. I'm sorry, but
that's a great advertisement. Debbie, thank you so much for being part of the Boardroom Bound podcast. And I would love for you to help our audience understand what's the best way that they should reach out and contact you.
So they can find both my direct contact information and more information at patinasolutions.com.
Very good. And I'll make sure we link to that in the show notes. And we were just delighted to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of our audience to be more boardroom bound.
Great. And thanks. This podcast is exciting. Thanks for what you're doing, Alexander.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Debbie Seeger, and I loved that we were able to consider boards from two parallels in her life. So we've got her individual personal growth and development over 20 years of board service, but then there's her day job leading Patina, where she is helping several different board types of capacities, if you will. So one are individuals seeking a board seat. Others are boards looking to improve their governance, their standards, their performance, how that all comes together. And one of the magical ways, and we'll have a link to this in the show notes, is that she's got a guide that we're going to share. It's called Preparing for Board Service. And this guidebook is a wonderful way for people to very quickly begin to understand different types of board roles and opportunities, not just nonprofit and for-profit, but even within for-profit. You've got public companies, you've got private companies. Boards have different experience and expectations, the pros and the cons, and of course there's tips to help you along the way. We will not only have that link, but we've also got a podcast that Debbie recently recorded with several wonderful women who are helping lead the cause for changing diversity in the boardroom. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, and you can get all of this information in a lot more detail over at podcast.gordon.edu. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, my simple request would be that you take 30 seconds to leave a review on iTunes. These reviews are one of the best ways we get out word about this show. Now, thanks for joining me on this episode. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.